Right, so the recording started now. So, the theme of today's conference is working in hybrid spaces, voluntary sector leadership and learning. In the current conditions, we tend to think about hybridity in terms of the mixture of online and offline spaces. Whilst this is important, in today's programme, we will have the opportunity to think more broadly about hybridity and perhaps challenge some of our assumptions. Cvsl is a vibrant space pulsing with ideas, but ideas with a purpose. They're about engaging and developing productive conversations with those in the voluntary sector, making real that conversation across research and practice. It is always a pleasure to be at these events and find a space for us to take a pause out of our busy days and do the work of collective engagement and reflection. In today's schedule, you'll hear from a variety of voices, both academics and practitioners, that unpick and explore what leadership is, can, or indeed could be in the voluntary sector. In the morning, we'll be listening to thoughts and hearing conversations and engaging with questions. In the afternoon, move to a more interactive workshop mode where you have the choice of themes. And I really urge you to stick around for the whole day and get lots of good conversations going. Now, before I pass you over to Carol Jacklin-Jarvis, who's the director of Cvsl, I have a few housekeeping points to make, so just bear with me for a moment. All the links for today's events are on the online programme you were sent yesterday. Please use this to find your way between sessions. We have aimed to make the transitions as smooth as possible, but if you get stuck at any point, please close Teams and use the online programme to join again. Heidi, Louise and Claire, and thanks to them, are the production team today, and one of them will be on standby to help at all times. I think Louise is going to add the link to the online programme just to make sure in the chat. Thank you, Louise. We encourage everyone to engage in the chat, ask those questions, gather your thoughts and put them out there. But we do ask that they remain polite. Anyone who's not adhere to our OU event policy, and I think Louise is going to share the link, will be removed from the session. Certainly for the morning period, all Q&As will be run via the chat box and be moderated that way. And I'll remind you of this, as will the other moderators. If you can't access any of the sessions, use the email oubs-cvsl@open.ac.uk, and this is also on the kind of website. This will be monitored, but we can't guarantee immediate tech support, but we'll try and get back to you. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, which is @OUBS School, and Louise is going to share that link as well. And let us know your thoughts using the hashtag CVSLConf2022. We also have a live feedback poll.
We're going to.
I think there's someone else with a microphone on. We have a live feedback poll and we'd love you to engage with it. Please let us know what you think of today's event, and Louise is going to share that link in the chat. So there's lots of links, lots of ways to engage and discuss, and really enjoy this day and have a great conversation. Having said that, have a really good day, enjoy it, and I'll now hand you over to Carol. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome from me as well to everybody. It's good to see people joining. I was just joining in the chat and seeing people there who I know and people I don't know. It's fantastic to have you on the call today. I don't know what it's like where you are, but it's a beautiful sunny day here. So I hope that you can look at the screen, but also see something of the green and the sun outside. I'm going to take a few moments just to reflect on the last 2 to 3 years of Cvsl's work, about some of our research projects and our teaching. I'm going to, as I talk, I'm going to share my slides. So it's always a moment when you kind of just hope that's going to work, but let me just do that as I speak. And one of the production team will let me know if there's any problem on that, but hopefully that has worked.
We can see that, Carol, thanks.
Thank you, Heidi, for the confirmation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work we've done over the last 2 to 3 years, but I'm not going to do that project by project. I'm going to draw out some themes in relation to our overall theme of hybrid working, the hybrid spaces of voluntary action. And we talked quite a lot internally about this theme and what we might mean by this theme. And so I'm going to draw some of that out in the following presentation. So let me hopefully flick through the slides. So on the left of the screen, you'll see some of the themes that I'm going to pick up on in this presentation. And on the right, you'll see just some of the research projects that certainly I have been involved in. And I should say I've been involved in them, but often I've played a very, very small part in some of these research projects. And I've had the absolute privilege of working with my internal colleagues, but also external partners. And it's a moment to say a huge thank you to internal colleagues, but also external partners who work with us on some of these research projects. And some of them are mini projects and some of them are quite big. But I'm going to draw out these themes around the hybrid spaces of voluntary action across some of those projects. So thank you, everyone, and forgive me if I don't mention your name on your project specifically, but it's been great, and it always is great that Cvsl works in partnership with so many people. Okay. So if you can believe it, my mobile phone is now just ringing, so I'm just about to switch it off. Always happens, doesn't it? Doesn't ring very often. So let's start with some definitional work. Hybrid, what do we mean by hybrid? Well, the online dictionary tells me that hybrid is a mixture of 2 or more very different things. But it's quite interesting to use that word. As I think Nik said in the introduction, we tend to think of on and offline, digital and physical space. But actually, the terms hybrid and hybridity have been used around the voluntary sector for quite some time. And very important scholar Billis talked about third sector organisations some time ago that have characteristics, not just the associational and voluntary characteristics that we associate with the third sector, but also characteristics of public and private sectors. And for example, there's been a lot of writing and thinking about bringing private sector practices into the third sector over the past 25 years or so that I've worked in and around the sector. So hybridity can mean quite a few things, but it refers, I think, to the way in which voluntary action is shaped by external pressures. And of course, digital and digitalisation is one of the key pressures that is particularly relevant at the moment. So I'm going to talk first about digital spaces, and I will be referencing here EU3 Digital, which is a large Erasmus Plus programme that Cvsl is a partner to. You can find out more about that programme on eu3digital.com. We're working there with Euclid and others who I know some of you know of Euclid's work. So I'm going to reference that programme, but also just to say to you that there will be a workshop this afternoon on digitalisation and digital journey being led by my colleague Top Foster. So please do join that workshop this afternoon. Many of these themes I'm going to touch on really briefly, but they will be dealt with in much more detail later in the day. But I wanted first of all just to reflect on learning and leadership development online. Many of you will know, because you know as well, you've been sort of partnering with us and linking to our events over the last perhaps 5 or 6 years that Cvsl has been functioning. And you'll know that we have free online courses, leadership development courses. And part of the aim there was to really widen the offer to people who might be struggling in the sector to access professional development and specifically leadership development. And you won't be surprised to know that during the COVID lockdown, actually the take-up of those courses grew exponentially. And of course, people could do that from their front room or their back room or their kitchen table or their garden or wherever they were. And that was really exciting to see that take up. And we were able to respond by putting a few more resources to support people in during that time. But I think there's many things we've learned from offering these free open access courses. I won't go into all the detail now, and hopefully you will in future months see a publication from the team around some of the things that we've learned. But one of the things that won't surprise you is that the learners also like to communicate with one another and to get support from one another, as well as from the academics back at Cvsl. And you can hear more about leadership learning clubs, which is a way of people working together, gaining peer support, but also getting some input from us in one of the workshops this afternoon on professional development. That workshop, my colleague Liz Moody will be making major contribution to that workshop this afternoon. And Liz will also speak about another issue that we've encountered, which is people doing the leadership courses are also saying to us, that's great, they're very nice and complimentary to us, but they might also say, I'd really like to do a course on something else. Can you signpost me? Well, the OU, as you may know, has actually not just one open access platform, but several open access platforms, and also low cost short courses, as well as our mainstream undergraduate and postgraduate programme. And so Liz will talk this afternoon in the professional development workshop about whether it's your own professional development or whether it's your teams or organisations, how you could signpost people through the Cvsl courses, but also to other opportunities with the OU. So please do join that. I think it's going to be a really interesting workshop and an important issue we know as we've researched our own teaching and how people have learned with us. And these are some of the issues we've encountered. So EU3 Digital then has told us what other research projects have also told us, and what those of you working in practice will know much better than us, that there's been a rapid acceleration of using digital tools and practices during the COVID crisis. And it's enabled organisations to reach people who otherwise would have been very isolated and marginalised. That's been really, really important. But we've also encountered in that research, just both in the literature and in terms of talking to people and some of the interview work that we've done, that digital can also exclude. And again, you will know that, and it can sometimes perpetuate where there is exclusion. And so that's a real challenge for the future. And another challenge is that digital doesn't very easily replicate the kind of dense network of relationships which so many of our research projects and I know many of your experiences will absolutely affirm is at the centre of voluntary action. So there's some really big questions there. The leadership challenge I've summarised at the bottom of this slide as to reimagine service delivery and engagement, to distribute leadership, to manage tension between change and continuity. And these will all be continuing topics for us in our ongoing research. So one of the issues and one of the questions I think that people are asking is place therefore, is it still important? If digital is so incredibly important and we can, by the miracle of technology, speak to one another across the UK and indeed with European partners and partners across the world, is place still important? And I think probably you would agree with me that COVID has actually shown that local voluntary action, place-based action is still really, really important. For many people who've struggled during COVID, it's been the really local response that's been important. And we have some continuing work on place-based leadership and the importance of place. That work came out of our original engagement in the Value of Small project funded by Lloyds Bank Foundation and the follow-up project in during COVID, all of this led by our colleagues at Sheffield Hallam University. And just going on from that and working with James Rees, former director of Cvsl, now at Wolverhampton University, and we're thinking with Voluntary Sector Studies Network as well, and our colleagues in that bigger network, both from practice and from research, about how the voluntary sector is not just shaped by place. It doesn't just doesn't happen in a place, but it also shapes place. The voluntary sector is really important in terms of what a place is becoming as the sector interacts with other agencies and with local communities. And within that as well, we've done some work on the role of local infrastructure, and there's some excellent blogs on Cvsl's website by my colleague Daniel Haslam, and also he'll be talking later in this morning's agenda to somebody who is leading a local infrastructure organisation. So the leadership challenge is something like this. It's to share in collective leadership of place, it seems to me, from a position of power asymmetry, and to manage tension between service delivery and those kind of voice functions that the sector has, which are so important in shaping place. Place does, I would argue, still matter. And I think all of the research that we've done, and even our experience in teaching online, still there is an importance of place and the huge value of people coming together in a place, even when they're learning online. So that's intriguing about how we actually manage some of that. My colleagues just put up some of our blogs into the chat so you can follow that link. So what does this all mean for the organisational spaces of voluntary action? Well, I think that in our research, we haven't yet learned about how people might be integrating, on the one hand, digital and the digital spaces like those that we are using today, and the physical. Actually, it seems to me that hybrid is always relevant, because there isn't an either or, because even today, as I speak to you in a digital space, actually, I'm incredibly conscious of my physical environment, which of course I cunningly set up this morning so you couldn't see the mess in my house. But my house, the space outside, the place where I am, is all actually so important in enabling me to do the job I do and to interact with you today. So there's always some level of hybridity going on, isn't there? But there's more for us all to think about, I think, and we haven't yet heard stories from the sector about how you are perhaps integrating digital space and physical space. And I just wanted to say today that we would love to hear from you. So do please email us if you're working that through. We'd love to talk to you about how that's going and to learn from one another. Important in all of this, of course, is that organisational models and ways of leading, one of the things that they are reacting to is the collaborative systems and the reality that so much voluntary action takes place in spaces that are influenced by the different sectors, as indeed Billis wrote about back in 2010 and back in the 1990s. So I think the leadership challenge in terms of organisations is to create an empowering, enabling and collaborative culture in organisations while getting things done and accounting for action. So there's something in a paper I wrote with James Rees, we talk about the importance of engaging with people in an organisation, but beyond an organisation, and stakeholder engagement and accounting for that action as well in the organisational space, even in very informal organisations. So fourthly, I just want to say something about inclusive spaces. You're going to hear a presentation with much more detail on this, and then also this afternoon, a workshop on Black and minority ethnic leadership of voluntary organisations with my colleague Fidelma Trasibo. But just to say really briefly, obviously this agenda has become really urgent for the voluntary sector. There is no doubt, and our research, including our research for EU3 Digital, highlights the importance and the potential impact that voluntary and community organisations can have on developing a more inclusive society. But there are also major challenges within the sector and in many sector organisations, and we know that very well. So there's a huge challenge, a leadership challenge, it seems to me, is to practice inclusive leadership in an increasingly pressured space of voluntary action because of some of the environmental issues, which I don't even have time to jump into today, but which obviously are impacting on us all, really, but particularly on those who are most marginalised in our society. And for those of us who are engaged in developing leadership practice, that includes us at CVSL, but I know includes some of you on the call as well. There's an enormous challenge to actually put inclusion right at the centre of that leadership development work. So I think that's an ongoing challenge for us, which Fidel and colleagues will say more about from our current research, our ongoing research, but also a continuing priority for next steps for CVSL. So it remains for me to remind you and signpost you to some of the CVSL resources. I've skipped really quickly through some of the themes that there are many themes I could have talked about, but just wanted to pick up on some of the themes as we think about and towards this idea of hybridity, and to encourage you to engage with CVSL resources as you journey through the next year with us, hopefully, until next year's CVSL conference. So first of all, just to remind you that on OpenLearn, which is, if you've dipped into OpenLearn, you'll discover it's a huge platform of free resources. And as I said, we are keen to signpost you into many of those resources, as well as encouraging you and your colleagues to join CVSL's leadership courses. So you'll find us on OpenLearn, where there is what we refer to as a landing page, which means it kind of signposts to CVSL's leadership courses. We'd love to see you and your colleagues in those courses. We'd love to hear more about if you want to set up peer-to-peer support groups, leadership learning clubs. Please do contact us. We'd like to talk to you about that. You can see on the screen grab here that there's a couple of courses in partnership with Volunteer Scotland, one of which was produced very quickly as a response to COVID. But also, if you go onto that page live and scroll down, thank you, Heidi, who's putting up links on the chat page there. Thank you. If you scroll down, you also see that we change regularly the links there to new courses that are emerging that might be of interest to the sector. So do journey through with us and explore that wonderful resource. But again, please also join the workshop on professional development this afternoon, where you can hear more about OpenLearn and navigating OpenLearn, but also many other platforms that the OU has that might be useful in widening access to professional development in the sector, being all too aware that resources are scarce. Most of those are either free or very low cost resources. So please do make use of them. I also have here a link to CVSL's website, but also there's a link, I think, also being posted in the chat. On CVSL's website, one of the things we do, so you'll see there are news items, there are little pieces about those of us who are located in the business school and who link us ourselves and our work to CVSL. But you also find we continually curate onto that website. So there are blogs which provide you with a really short snapshot of some of our key research, both so some of that's in real time, so you can actually know what's going on. And we're recording today, and the presentations will be put up onto that website. But there are also recordings from multiple events over the year. So if you missed some of the absolutely excellent webinars that my colleagues put on during the year, you'll find recordings there, so you can dip in, see them for yourselves. But also, if you want to, you can take those and you can use them with your teams, with your organizations. Please, obviously, when you're using our resources, just give us a credit, but we would love you to make use of them. They are sitting there to be made use of in the sector. Many of you will know, because you've journeyed with us over a number of years, that our absolute aim is to ensure that our ongoing research and, of course, our teaching and our leadership development work is really relevant to people out in the sector. And by writing that up in small blogs, which are much more readable and accessible pieces than some of our academic papers, as much as we would love you to read our academic papers, but do go into the blogs and the small video segments and access them there. We also, many of you will know this because that's how you heard about today, but if you're not signed up to our newsletter, if you email CVSL-OUBS email address at the top of this screen and ask to be added to the newsletter, then we will ensure that you get a newsletter which actually tells you a new blog has gone live. You might want to have a look at it, or we're now engaged with this research. And also to encourage you, please do email us if any of that research is of interest to you and you would like to talk to us further, then we would love to talk to you. Much of our work we do in partnership with, yes, other academics, but also people working on the ground, working in practice. You're going to hear from some of those people today, and we'd love to continue to develop those partnerships. So that's my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. I hope that's given you some sort of taster of what we've been up to today. Hopefully I've stopped sharing there. and what we've been up to over the last 2 to 3 years. It has been for us, like you, a really interesting and challenging period of time. And of course, one of the things that's changed is that we are talking to you today on Teams and not meeting face to face, and we'll be looking again at that and thinking about next year's conference and thinking, is it time to actually move and meet face to face again? But we look forward to continuing to talk to you today, but also throughout the year. And I really just lastly would encourage you that these themes that I've touched on really, really briefly will be explored in the workshops this afternoon. So please do join us in those workshops.